The 2017 CT6. Here we have a broken front differential, prop shaft U-joint dried out, snapped. Broke the front diff. So we got a new diff from GM, new prop shaft. We're gonna be putting it all in. Alright, so I learned this the hard way. Before you start taking all the suspension apart, take the wheel well liners off, because they got to come off before lowering the subframe. So take off the wheel housing liners, and then all the coverings down here. See, I got them all right there, and then got the wheel housing liners, brake rotor, axle, get all that. So the spindles, I'm replacing the spindles because the ball joints were bad. So this ball joint has play in it. Can't really see it on camera. This one was good, but I'm still just going to do them both. So these are getting replaced. The wheel bearings are getting transferred. I also took out the axles. The axles came out real easy. Yeah, spindles are straightforward. Just unbolt everything. And then from here, the next steps are going to be, we got to disconnect the steering. You want to make sure your steering wheel is tied in place so it doesn't move when it's disconnected. And then we got to take the nuts off the top of the motor mounts right here. So this is the engine mount. You got to take the top nut off both sides. And then we're going to disconnect power from the steering gear. And then there's also a harness that is clipped to the subframe that goes kind of around the whole edge. Just make sure that's disconnected from the subframe. So once you have all the shielding off, you got to disconnect everything from the subframe. So you got the steering shaft disconnected. Make sure the steering wheel is locked. If it's not locked with the electronic lock, then tie it in place with a belt or something. This is probably just going to stay here when we lower the subframe. My nuts are off of the engine mounts. We have the radiator no longer supported by the subframe. We got a tie down in place holding it up here. So that's now self-supported. Make sure that the strut and the upper control arm are free from all the subframe stuff. So if you're going to leave your spindle on here, you could leave the axle shafts and the spindle attached. Just disconnect the spindle from the upper control arm and disconnect the strut from the lower control arm, and then you can just lower the spindle with the lower arms and the tie rod attached. And we just need to go up and set up the engine support, and we can drop the subframe. So I got this engine support off of FCP Euro for 70 bucks. It seems to work really well. It's made for transverse engines, but it worked really well for this case too. So we took a chain, wrapped it around the exhaust downpipe on both sides. Now you don't want your chain to be pinching your wires against the engine, so it kind of loosened that from against the head. Unplugged the coils, had to take out the solenoid that was right here. But this worked really well for supporting the engine. Again, this side to unplug the coils, pull the harness away from the engine, Pulled a couple random hoses off, like that goes from here to there, there to there. So I don't think I had to pull this cowl off. This just sits where this piece sat. It might sit underneath where the big piece sat, but I wasn't totally sure how this was going to sit while I was getting ready, so I took the whole cowl off with the wipers and everything. But yeah, this is where I ended up having it sit. The rubber's nice, kept it from sliding around. I also put the zip tie on there just to make sure it didn't move around before the weight of the engine was on it. But it didn't budge. So this, again, this is after doing the job. This did not move at all. It worked really well. And then I also took this off because you're supposed to lower the engine a little bit to actually slide the differential in and out. We didn't end up having to lower the engine. We just kept it right at this height, and it was enough room to slide the intermediate shaft in and out of the oil pan while it was connected to the differential. The intermediate shaft gets installed as an assembly. The new differential actually came with the intermediate shaft already in it. So I don't even know if it would be reasonable to remove and reinstall that afterwards. All right, so we got the engine supported. We got it chained up, and then took the subframe down. So some things you gotta watch out for, things that are attached to the subframe. Make sure you unplug the steering gear. And all these Christmas tree inserts are going into holes into the subframe. And then the PCM has two bolts going down, one here and then one on this side that go down into the subframe. So make sure those come off. This one you can get from the top. This one you can get from the bottom. And then we got, and then you got to lower the, once you take the subframe off, you got to lower the engine a few inches. How far did you have to lower the engine? Or no?
No.
You didn't lower the engine? Okay, so I guess you don't have to lower the engine. You can just slide it out, and we got the new one going in already. So looks like this heat shield was in the way, so we're working on taking that off. And if the prop shaft, the old prop shaft is installed while you're doing this, it might change the procedure a little bit. But ours had broken and it was off, so that's where we're at right now. Before you remove and install the differential, you also have to remove the housing that's right here. It's pretty simple. There's a vent that goes in the side, and then 3 bolts. It comes right off. So it's right here. And make sure to check this bearing too. Make sure it's good. If it's not good, you got to replace this whole thing. When installing the new diff, you got 4 mounting bolts, 2 here and 2 in this side. Put in all 4 hand tight, and then these 2 go to 22 foot-pounds, and then 180 degrees. Make sure you got new bolts in there, because you'll probably snap the old ones if you try to torque the old ones to the same spec. And then the back ones also need to be replaced. We got 22 foot-pounds also for both, and then 90 degrees. Procedure says these 2 first, and then these 2. And after that, you can tighten up the prop shaft. These are 43 foot-pounds each one. Make sure you have thread locker on the bolts if you're not using new bolts with the thread locker on there beforehand. This is an 8mm hex. And then for the intermediate shaft housing, you got 3 bolts, just 43 foot-pounds. Those can be reused. After getting the subframe back in place, you got 6 mounting bolts here. They need to be torqued to 74 foot-pounds, and then 30 to 45 degrees of turning afterwards. Make sure those 6 bolts are all replaced, and this one. This one gets on each side gets torqued to 74 foot-pounds and no additional degrees afterwards. 74, 74. And then the last thing, before you put your axle in, here's the fill port for the front diff. Make sure to fill up the front diff before putting this axle in, because once the axle is in, you got no more access to that fill port. Let's see down here, it's up there around the corner. There's no accessing it from underneath the car without having that axle out. That's the only way. It's a 14 millimeter hex. If you're doing this job, make sure you have a 14 millimeter hex handy, because you don't want to miss out on that. If you don't have a 14 millimeter hex, you can get away with just pouring it into the axle hole. You'll get a little bit more fluid in there than if you use the fill port, because it's just a tiny bit higher edge, but it'll work. All right, but that's it. So to fill the diff, take your fluid, stick it in the hole, and then this is spillage right here, but you wanna just squeeze it in there until you start getting fluid pouring back out the hole. It's taking a lot of fluid. There we go. So now it just started to come out a little bit more. I think pushing the container onto the hole was kind of keeping it from flowing out a little bit. But I have no idea how much fluid was already in here. I did not use this whole thing, maybe 2/3 of it, but there may have been fluid in here from shipping. This is a brand new diff. All the holes were plugged up, but some of it had leaked out. So I don't know how much you're gonna need. I would get 2 quarts just in case. But that's how to fill up your Cadillac CT6 front diff. So when you first put the spindle in place, the order of operations is a big deal. So I'm going to tell you how I did it. That wasn't too hard. So the nut for the spindle ball joint here and the front lower control arm here, I kept in my pocket right nearby. And then what I did was I carried the whole thing over, slid the axle in to start, and then fed both of these two stems in at the same time. So all 3 of these at the same time, both of these lower joints and the axle all at once. And then just kind of lifted it up until I was able to hit the threads on both of these, and then just started both nuts on by hand. And then once they were both started, once you got these 3 in and the 2 nuts started, you can kind of pull up and down on this while make sure your axle nut isn't on, because then you don't want to separate the joints here. So leave that nut off, make sure this is compressed, and then you can pull down on this, and while pushing this way with your other hand to get these 2 to line up. You might need to take a pry bar in here too to split it open just a little bit. While you're pushing that, have the bolt handy, and then you can slide it in there as soon as it lines up. You can also use a screwdriver. Once the 2 holes are somewhat overlapping, you can use a flathead screwdriver and use it to pull it the rest of the way into place. Here, I just got my screwdriver in, so the holes are partially aligned. You can use this to pull it centered, and then you can put your bolt into the other side. So once you got your bolt through, you can start the nut and then just leave it. You do not want to tighten this until the car is sitting with the suspension at ride height. So once we got all this bolted together, we can lower the car close to the ground, put a floor jack under here, and lift up the suspension until the hub is right about where the wheel sits when it's driving. That's when you want to tighten this and torque it. So after that's in place, you can slide this on, and then we're going to get this in place. So you can pull this. You might need to put your floor jack under here because right now you're fighting the force of the spring and the force of the bushings. So this is going to be really hard to get together. You can use a pull jack or a floor jack under the knuckle to get these to come up and meet. And then just start that nut, and then you can put the tie rod through here. You can torque that, torque the nuts on the bottom, these two joints down here, and then you can torque the nut on your axle. This nut is going to be the first nut you want to torque, and you want to torque it as soon as possible because it's going to be really hard to get your torque wrench in there once all this is bolted in place. So all I have is these two joints with the nut started. I have this bolt in place, and that's it. So the knuckle is released from the top still. So these two down here are going to be 30 foot-pounds plus 120 degrees. And that's where we're going to start. The top nut is going to be 74 foot-pounds, and then after that the tie rod is going to be 26 foot-pounds plus 85 degrees. After you get all the brakes back together, we just have the axle nut here. Torque spec is 111 foot-pounds, and then you got to loosen it about 45 degrees, so about 1/8 of a turn, about that far, and then you got to retighten it to 199. So I usually stick a hex in there through the brake rotor against the caliper to keep the wheel from spinning while I torque it. It's very important to torque this to spec, or your wheel bearing will go out. If it's too loose, your wheel bearing will fall apart. If it's too tight, your wheel bearing will wear out prematurely.